Finding a home in Korea happens in different ways. Some search directly on property apps. Some get information from expat communities. Some sign a contract through an acquaintance. Some walk into a neighborhood real estate office. The way differs, but what remains at the end is the same. One lease contract. A lease contract has a date written on it. But that date is written by the lessor and the lessee. A separate date, confirmed by a public agency, can also be obtained. That date is called a fixed date. Whether that date has been obtained can change the order for getting the deposit back when a home goes to auction. This video covers 3 things. First, what a fixed date is. Second, when and where to get one. Third, what changes when a contract is renewed or the deposit changes. Let us start with what a fixed date is. A fixed date is a date. It is a public agency confirming that the contract existed on that day. It does not certify that the contents of the contract are fair. What the agency does is write the grant date, the deposit, and the rent into its own book, the fixed date register. So the terms of the contract on that day also remain on the agency's side. A lease contract is made by 2 people, the lessor and the lessee. Because of that, different claims about the date or the amount can come later. A fixed date creates one more record outside the contract. It leaves what the contract said on that day in the fixed date register. The record in the fixed date register cannot be changed by the parties, so a date and an amount carrying a fixed date are hard to dispute later. Here is where many people misunderstand. They assume a fixed date protects the deposit by itself. Holding a fixed date alone does not create an order for getting the deposit back. 2 more things are needed. The next part covers them together. Now let us look at what right a fixed date creates. Securing an order for getting the deposit back requires 3 things. The first is being provided with the house. That means actually moving in and living there. The second is reporting to the authorities that this address is where the lessee lives. For foreign residents, the report on change of place of stay serves as this report. The third is the fixed date. Meeting all 3 creates the preferential repayment right. The 2 rights are different. Being provided with the house and completing the report on change of place of stay create opposing power. That is the power to keep living there and to ask for the deposit back even when the lessor changes. From here on, these 2 will be called the 2 requirements for opposing power. Adding the fixed date creates the preferential repayment right. That is the right to be repaid the deposit ahead of anyone ranked later when the home goes to auction or public sale. The order is exactly what the fixed date adds. Now, let us look at which date sets the order. That date will be called the baseline date. First, it matters when opposing power begins. Opposing power does not begin on the day the 2 requirements are met. It begins at midnight at the start of the next day. The baseline date is the later of the day the fixed date was granted and the day opposing power began. Not the earlier one, but the later one. This single rule is the most important thing in this video. Here are the results by situation. With nothing done, there is neither opposing power nor the preferential repayment right. With only the 2 requirements for opposing power, there is opposing power but not the preferential repayment right. With only a fixed date, the preferential repayment right has not arisen yet. The fixed date already granted does not disappear though. Once opposing power begins later, the preferential repayment right arises from that day. Only when all 3 are completed do both rights exist together. There is one exception worth knowing. A separate system exists for lessees whose deposit is small. Under it, an amount up to a limit set by law can be repaid first, even without a fixed date. 3 things go with that though. First, the 2 requirements for opposing power are still needed. Second, what comes back is not the whole deposit, but an amount up to a limit set by law. Third, even that limited amount may not be paid in full, depending on the situation. That is because when several lessees in the same building have small deposits, the amount is divided among them. Now let us look at the misunderstanding that comes up most often. Many people think this way. The thought is that getting a fixed date early, on the signing day, sets the order from that day. That is not the case. Suppose a contract is signed on February 1st and the fixed date is obtained the same day. On March 10th, the lessee moves in and files the report on change of place of stay. Opposing power begins the next day, on March 11th. The baseline date is March 11th. It does not move back to February 1st. That is because the later of the two dates is the baseline date. That does not mean it can be put off. Consider the reverse case. On March 10th, the lessee moves in and files the report on change of place of stay. Opposing power begins the next day, on March 11th. But the fixed date is forgotten and obtained on April 20th. This time, the day the fixed date was granted is later, so the baseline date is April 20th. If the lessor created a security interest on March 15th in between, that side takes the earlier place in line. Getting it late pushes the order back by exactly that much. Two things go together here. However early the fixed date is obtained, the baseline date never moves ahead of the day opposing power begins. When it is obtained before opposing power begins, the baseline date is the day opposing power begins. When it is obtained after opposing power begins, the baseline date moves to the day the fixed date was granted. The order is pushed back by exactly how late it was obtained. For that reason, obtaining it right after signing the contract can be a safer choice. Now let us look at how to get one. Let us clear up one misunderstanding first. Some assume foreign residents cannot obtain a fixed date. That is not the case. The law includes foreign residents among those who can be granted a fixed date. The courts have also held that there is no difference between Korean nationals and foreign residents on this point. Two things are needed. The first is the original lease contract. It has to carry the signature or seal of the lessor and the lessee. The second is identification. The first method is going in person. The agencies that grant a fixed date are set by law. A township or village office or a community service center in the area where the house is located is the most common one. A court, a registry office, or a notary public office can also grant it. The advantage of this method is that it is handled on the spot at the counter. The original contract comes back with the date stamped in the margin. The second method is online. An application can be filed through the Supreme Court's Internet Registry Office. The contract is scanned or photographed and uploaded, and identity verification follows. There is one point to watch, though. Applying and being granted are not the same thing. An application filed late in the day, on a weekend or on a holiday, may be granted on the next working day. A later grant date means a later baseline date for the order. So when a specific date is essential, visiting in person is more certain and safer. There is a third method. Korea has a system for reporting housing lease contracts. When the lease contract is submitted together with the report, a fixed date is treated as having been granted. Not every contract is subject to the report, though. It depends on the deposit and monthly rent amounts, and it also depends on the area where the house is located. A renewal that only extends the term without changing the amounts is not subject to the report either. So rather than relying on the report alone, checking whether the fixed date was actually granted is advisable. There are things to do afterwards. First, check that the date is properly stamped on the contract. When the application was filed online, check that the grant is complete. Second, keep the original contract until the lease ends. That original is the document that proves the order. Third, keep a copy or a photo separately. Finally, let us look at renewing a contract or changing the deposit. Mistakes happen often here, but there is something to say first. What follows describes the general case. Situations where a contract is renewed or the deposit changes differ a great deal from person to person. The contract terms differ, what was agreed with the lessor differs, and whether a loan or a guarantee is involved differs too. Those differences can change what needs to be done. When a contract is actually renewed or the deposit changes, taking your own contract to the relevant authority or a professional is safer. Here is the first case. It is renewing only the term without changing the deposit. No new amount has arisen that needs protection. The order secured by the first fixed date is what applies. So what matters here is the first contract. Keeping the first contract as it is what proves that order. Here is the second case. It is renewing with the deposit reduced. The lessor returns part of the deposit. To record that, a new contract is often written. There is something to know at this point. The reduced amount is already inside the range that the first fixed date protects. So here too, the first contract has to be kept as it is. Here is the third case. It is increasing the deposit. The handling changes here. The increased amount is not protected by the fixed date on the first contract. Raising the deposit means a new contract is written. A new fixed date has to be obtained on that newly written contract reflecting the increase. Only then does the increased amount hold an order from that day. The first deposit and the increased amount end up with different baseline dates. There is one trap here. The baseline date for the increased amount is the day the new fixed date is obtained. If the lessor created a security interest in between, the increased amount ranks behind it. So checking the certificate of registered matters again before sending the increased deposit is safer. Something is common to all three cases. It is writing a new contract as part of the renewal. Two things are worth remembering. First, if the new contract reads as replacing the first one, a dispute can arise over whether the first contract still has effect. Leaving a note that this continues the existing contract is advisable. The second is keeping documents. Keep the original of the first contract as it is, and keep a copy or a photo separately as well. A fixed date is stamped on the original contract, and the agency that grants it keeps no copy. So once the original is lost, it cannot be reissued. Sometimes the lessor asks for the original of the first contract. In that case, first ask whether a copy can be provided instead. If the original is still requested, getting advice from a professional before handling it is safer. Once the original is handed over, it may not come back. Without the first contract, the order for the first deposit becomes hard to prove. And getting a new fixed date on a rewritten contract does not bring the first date back. One more thing. Obtaining a fixed date is not the end. The preferential repayment right holds only while the two requirements for opposing power are maintained. Living in that home has to continue until the deposit comes back, and the report on change of place of stay has to stay at that address. If either one stops, the preferential repayment right can be lost. Here is the summary. The preferential repayment right requires three things. They are being provided with the house, the report on change of place of stay, and the fixed date. The baseline date is the later of the day the fixed date was granted and the day opposing power began. The methods are going in person, applying online, and submitting with the housing lease report. If the deposit was increased, a new fixed date goes on the newly written contract reflecting the increase. The first contract is kept until the lease ends. This video provides general guidance on obtaining and keeping a fixed date. Depending on your situation, additional checks may be needed, and the way to handle it may differ. Checking directly with the relevant office about your own situation or talking to a professional before an important decision is a good idea.